Hello and welcome to another edition of Life Dimensions. My name is Dr. Frank Trupiano. I'm a practicing psychotherapist near the city of New Orleans, and I'm with a colleague of mine today, Miss Dahlia Hampton. And Dahlia has a real heart for mental health, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, particularly some of the experiences she's had, and hopefully, I've worked in home health as well, and I've also did medical social work, so I do have some familiar with that. But Dahlia, when I think about Dahlia, I think about her. She's like a catalyst. She is the energy you put in an equation to make it work. She has, right, Dahlia? You're full of energy, and you pull people together, and you make things happen, which is something we need to get the ideas of mental health across.
True.
So,
True, but that's...
Go on.
I never always thought of myself to be that.
Right.
So when I get a compliment, which you have given me over the years a lot of compliments, very, very hard to take. Mm-hmm. So the thing about it is that when I think of mental health, or I even thought about you asking me to do this, mm-hmm. the first question that came in was, could I? Mm. Could I do it? Because it would seem to me that, well, what do I know? You have the degrees, right? So a lot of people think that, when you talk about mental illness, in my opinion, prior to you asking me doing this, I think it's still very much frowned upon.
It is. And one of the things that I think makes me a good therapist is that I don't separate myself from my patients. I see mental health as on a continuum. It's like a measuring stick. And we're all on there somewhere, right?
Correct.
And being ready to do something is a sign of mental health. Think of it, to have self-esteem, to feel the confidence. And sometimes you need help, and that's where a therapist would come in, or someone or a life coach.
But that's what you were saying. You used the key word. You just told me that we're on this spectrum, right?
Right,
so,
exactly.
Mental health, in my opinion, is the question that was always in my experience with not only just hospice, but in general, right? When do you ask for that help? That you have the background, but I look at it from, say, the average person.
There you go. That's
okay?
Okay.
So I was blessed because, when you're younger, as you go up, it's always about, finding your way, okay? And if you've never experienced mental illness,
well, one of the
harsh,
things,
right?
As a therapist, one of the things I learned early on is that it takes a lot of courage for a person to call me. I didn't understand that at first. It's scary to reach out and ask for help. Interestingly, I was thinking about this morning. I think about a lot of things. But in America, we are very independent, self-reliant. These are our strengths. They're wonderful values. But as you know, a strength sometimes can become a weakness when we carry it too far. And a lot of us, and I'm learning this as I get older, that I need to learn to let people help me. We need to learn how to let people help us. And that's why I'm letting you help me, because I know you have gifts and skills that I don't have, that you can help me to really get this message across. And I'm really thankful that you are here today.
And I appreciate that. But getting back to, as far as what you say, one of my goals was, when I thought about it, is to get back to what you were saying, is could I do something without the degrees that you hold and you possess, and that was your study and your love. There are many of my friends or colleagues, like, if you just ask a simple question, how did you become a doctor? Everybody says it's a passion. You listen to the cliches and say, you just, it was a calling.
Right. Exactly.
That's not how I started. So I think what was important when we discussed the hospice, and you and I over the years bonded per se, it was...
So you say you didn't feel like you were called?
I
But that's
did,
not how you started.
but I didn't know it.
Ah, okay.
So,
you found out along.
you know, I always think that as, you know, life goes on, we connect the dots as like what you said, maybe experiences happen. So you're either fortunate, in my opinion, to have good parents, and that was the mold, right?
Right.
You are from what you have learned, your background. But I was always the one who challenged my dad, as much as he was a big source of my life. As you start developing into who you are, right, you can be inquisitive about certain things in your life. Who's to say that's right or wrong? If you would have told me that, and any of my friends or family that knew me, you would one day be holding the hand of people and help them transition.
Yeah.
No matter what your beliefs are, I would have said, absolutely not. I didn't know that that was my calling at one point, or that I would be good at it. So without, you know,
Well,
being...
you bring up an interesting point, and that is we discover who we are as we go along in life. Not everyone is born and know they're going to be a musician or an artist. Some people know immediately. It's like they from childhood. But most of us, we have to discover it, and we discover who we are through experiencing. That's why I encourage people to experiment, try different things, whatever your heart is on, and just give it a shot and see. You may fall in love with it, and it becomes your passion.
But not everybody knows.
Not everybody knows.
And that was our dynamic, because sometimes, so I think what was really important when you asked me to do this was in the beginning to say, one of the things was I felt, and I think that you agreed, that mental illness is not really talked about, in my opinion, to where you could be across from somebody and talking with them and
that
say,
stigma still,
yeah, they like, wow, this person would really need someone. I think we confide in maybe friends, some family members, and it's just shamed. It's, you know, to say that you need help would be saying, like, I guess it was taboo, crazy.
Right.
And so the reason why I related to that more so, and I've shared stories, was because in hospice, it was such a taboo. Everybody that I've encountered over the many years when I got into hospice was very much afraid. That was an emotion, right? Just like love and fear, and they were afraid. Nobody knows what happens when we when we pass on, right? So you have today where society talks about religion and this. You don't want to offend anyone, but...
And you know, maybe that's why we are having this conversation, because today, more than ever, right, we are starting to talk about and have dialogues about things like racism, you know, sexuality. All these things are really coming to the front, where people are being more open or desiring to say, hey, let's stop acting like this. Something wrong with us, but this is humanity. This is who we are. We're all flawed. We all have problems, and we have to stop judging each other. And
some people, I think that way. And I think it's easy sometimes when you and I are having conversations, we can maybe agree, and then we'll agree to disagree. But in the back of my mind, I always still challenge you, I guess, to where you can kind of shed some light, because I'm intrigued that, you know, it used to say, my dad used to say that, you know, you can have your own opinion, right? And just like what you were mentioning, we want to talk about, like, you know, how we're evolving, but not everybody does.
Right.
The person that wants to come out, I mean, think about it, in my dad's time, you would have never seen someone that would come out in their sexuality back in those days. I think that for the same reason that we are taking that plunge and going even onto a social media platform, and that's a whole nother discussion that we have opinions on. It is to bring awareness, because I think the people that are average per se and not of fame, right? Maybe there were some important people that brought out, you know, sexuality. If you wanted to have a movie star that came out, I mean, we could name them, Caitlyn Jenner, or, you know, it might make them easy, but what about the ones that are just watching? I mean, because that's what I feel, that people are getting most of their information from social media.
This is true, right?
As much as we want to hang on to
Yeah.
the old school, I think we have to evolve, right? Just like what we said, just get out of our comfort zone. But, you know, there are people that are fortunate, like you said in the beginning, that will come out and seek help. But I'm here saying that no.
And again, it does depend upon, you know, how you were raised and your upbringing, and people who were more accepting or understanding. I know yourself, you have, we all have issues. I had an uncle, actually, I'll never forget, when I was a little kid, talking about how things were kept in secret, but he went to South, what is the, in Covington, it's the old hospital.
You talking to a South Shore?
Yeah, South Shore, you know, I'm from the West Bay. So.
I'm from the West Bay.
But anyway, he went to the hospital. At the time, it was the only state hospital. And he was
DePaul.
Not DePaul's. God, it's ancient.
One of those.
One of those.
One of those.
We'll figure it out and we'll put edit it in maybe. But he went. All I remember is I had this vision of him crossing the causeway. You know, the causeway is 24 miles, right? It's very long. And it was, in my mind, it was just this little narrow bridge. And it was cloudy, it was foggy, and he went over there and he never came back. Because he went to have electric shock treatment. And in those days, it was very dangerous. And I never really understood what happened, and no one ever really talked about it other than that. And that always stayed with me, you know, that this was kind of like, you know, kept secret, and that's
because it
something
was a frowned upon.
Right.
It was frowned upon, and the way that I was able to kind of, like I said, connect the dots. I always say that, you know, and I'm going to keep referencing my dad the entire time, but he used to always tell me that, you know, the fool is the person that thinks they know everything, right? Until they put you under,
I agree, yeah.
You're supposed to learn.
Right.
And I think you're supposed to be open-minded.
Right.
Just because you don't believe, you know, you can agree to disagree. Those are all cliches, just like me getting into, you know, my career when I first started hospice. I always said I had the hardest time taking compliments. And the reason why was because this here is surface, right? And that's what society judges you, what you look like, without even knowing what's here.
Exactly.
So I was fortunate that I was taught that at a very early age. And then finding my niche was because when I first encountered my first hospice patient, I don't believe in coincidence, you know that.
Yeah, I don't either.
And one of the very first patients I saw, long story short, was someone that had worked with my father, and he had just passed.
Interesting.
And the young lady that I was supposed to be shadowing looked like a used car salesman. She didn't acknowledge him. She didn't do anything that I was raised to tell your peers hello, acknowledge them. So it made me think, it bothered me enough to say, you know, I have some experience in the way that I was presenting on how to do this job. The rest came from maybe our natural instinct. Some people call it tuition, whatever you relay it as, but
it's like a knowing and knowing how to do it.
Exactly. He was a human, and he was going to pass.
Right.
So how do I do my job without sounding
like a used car
salesman? That was important to me because this was life. You know, we don't remember when we're born, right? You hear stories, your mother takes pictures of you, but when you have a baby, now look at today, how, like you say, society evolves. We now throw gender reveals, baby showers, couple showers, there's a party. But for death, there was no party. It was a lot of confusion. It was a lot of denial. Right? There was the grief, there was the shock. So some of those things we were taught, book-wise, to experience and put yourself in that position. How do you make someone feel comfortable about something that you've never experienced? So I could say things to that patient, and what I learned over the time that I felt was very, very important was it was one thing to do my job and to ask for the business. Once I had the privilege, because that's what I felt like it was, to see these families at their weakest time, I was always deeper. Like they didn't ask me to be a part of their journey. So I felt that I had an obligation and a due diligence to say, you know, take the fear, but how do you take the fear out of that?
Right.
And so you learn, right, as you go, and it was being myself.
Right,
It was
exactly.
acknowledging that I don't know what's going to happen. I know that you're very sick. And then there was a whole other dynamic for the people that they leave behind. But the thing that always intrigued me was the stories that the patient that was sick and was going to pass on would say, the regrets that they didn't that they had, because they know that you know what their
Right.
fate was, and then the people that they left behind. So, like I said, over many, many years, and you and I discussed that, is it was intriguing at first, but then it was connecting the dots.
You know, if I could
because-
just comment that it is about being a genuine human being. It seems to be rare today.
it is. It very much
you
is.
know, everybody is wearing a mask. Everybody's trying to be something they're not. And for me, I know I've read where there are over 600, probably more now, different psychotherapies. You know, we talk about cognitive therapies, conflict, all kind of things. But the common denominator of all of them, the thread that goes through all of these therapies, is the relationship between the patient and the therapist. That is something you can't fake. You can't learn it in a book. It's about being a genuine, caring, compassionate person. And anybody could be that. And that's
I agree.
Would
I
you-
totally agree, because I think it's no different than when you look at your physician, right?
there
You
we
have
go.
to
That's
trust
a whole
them.
nother area, patient, right?
But you trust him. There's something. There's got to be. You might like him,
Right.
but you trust him. So if a doctor is saying, you know, this is what you need based on the symptoms that you tell him, and you give him this, you know, he prescribed you something, then bam, you're cured. He's the best doctor ever. But then you also have to say, how many people really pay attention to their mind,
Right.
right? That was discussions you had, mind, body, soul. If a doctor can say, oh, you know, your aches are probably caused through stress. And people like, oh, really? No, you didn't pull anything, it's stress.
But you know, what's interesting is that you can only take, this is my belief, you can only take a person as far as you've gone. If you don't have something, you can't give it to another.
Can't offer it.
And so we have these amazing doctors that are specialists in every area of the body, right? But they don't have the understanding, because they've never, look, I'm a metaphysicist, my PhD is in metaphysics, so I've studied a lot of different religions. I'm very open to looking at that, and I feel very comfortable talking about spiritual issues with a client. And when people are dying, they need to have that discussion. That's
agree.
important to them.
I agree.
And if you're a doctor, you're really not trained, and you don't really know how to do that. But a lot of it is just, again, I had a supervisor that told me this I'll never forget. She said, her name was Mindy Appel, if Mindy's out there somewhere. She said, if you're a naturally good person, you will always do the right thing. And so if you're a good person, you're not going to hurt someone. And you're
But I
going
think
to
we
reach out
get
and touch
lo-
that person. And
But I think we get lost, though. I think life throws curveballs. I think I was a good person, but there's been times that was the one thing that bothered me. And you know that if I was this great person, right? Society says, okay, you're beautiful. Well, I was raised to say, well, this is not supposed to matter, this is. And then I think sometimes we get lost. Like when life throws things at you, you start questioning yourself. You say, well, if I'm so good, then why does this happen to me? What, right? We try to find reasons. We search for answers for good and bad. Just like if there was a hospice patient that was fine, and I heard it a lot. You know, I used to always say when people say how you do hospice, it was a story. I loved the story. The story, the bigger picture, it was always the same, okay? The difference is like what you said, it was the uniqueness about that person. That's what I wanted
And that's what you work
to hear.
with. Yeah.
When we leave, like when I would leave from one patient, it made me think about myself. It was always that wake-up call to be humble, like, oh man, you know, this lady, you know, did this to you at the store, ran you off the road. And then I would feel, you know, horrible when I heard what this family went through, and it humbled you. But then, of course, I was the overthinker. And then I thought, well, that's great for me, and I can maybe share that, right?
Right. It's like that saying, you complain you don't have shoes until you see someone without any feet, you know?
Yeah, well, exactly.
There's always somebody that has something.
Just when it's all the cliches that, you know.
But it is humbling to do that kind of work.
But what about the people that didn't get, that's where I was at. Like, what about the people that, you know, didn't get to see? There was like the double-edged sword, you know. It was very humbling to see that. And like you said, I agree. If I was talking to a friend or another colleague and they were having a bad day, I always felt like, you know, sometimes sitting at dinner, the oddball out was, you know, oh my God, I had a bad day. This lady, I was calling her about her collections, and she was telling me this and this and this, and then I had a bad migraine. And then it was like a round table, and they're like, well, what happened to you? And it's like, well, I had somebody tell me pretty much, you know, everything leading up into the cancer that they had and the gruesome details, and then they died holding my hand. So the point is after a while, for the same reason that I thought I was good at that, there came a point to where I started detaching and say, who would really understand that? My bad day and your bad day. I think we related. You listen to stories, right?
Oh, yeah, many.
But then you also still have to be objective, right?
And you know, touching on that, when we care for other people, there's something that's called secondary trauma, and I've had it already. If listening to a soldier and that's come back from Iraq talk about, you know, being in a firefight and seeing his friend blown up right in front of him, I can go to sleep that night and have a nightmare, a bad dream. It's similar to what they're having, so it's kind of like I'm being traumatized. So the point I'm trying to make is we need to learn how to take care of ourselves as caretakers. You know, we could go in so many directions with this topic about mental health. There's certainly,
Agreed.
right?
Oh God, yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about over the next 100 or so videos. We'll never get to the end of it.
That was one of the things that my dad used to say. That I had, where over the years I said, okay, well, the gift of gab, finally it got put to use. But it was reforming that. It was knowing that is, you know, like I said, we could go over so many aspects of things and behaviors, right? Wouldn't you agree? It's all behaviors. It's making heads or tails, which always points us back to mental health.
Yes.
And so I always said, you know, how do we shed light to it? It was something that I said all the time, through colleagues, through friends, but never on a
It's a
on
serious
platform.
subject, right? But
Very serious.
But we don't want it to be so serious that we can't talk about it.
Exactly. I think
And that's to bring some humor to it. I think some.
Well, that
you
would
know,
be
they say
me.
laughter is the best is the best medicine.
And it's true, but you also have to learn that I've had to learn as well, is that sometimes it's also to hide pain. A lot of times when people thought, oh, I was the life of the party and deli is fun and this and that, it was, if I was quiet, then something had to be wrong with me. And they may have been right at that moment, they may have not. Like I said, the real bigger picture was, if I needed the help then we suppressed it, right?
Right.
We might not have been able to use that term. I always say that, you know, I felt sorry for some of the elderly people that I did have to help, and it made, as a caretaker, as you had said, sometimes we don't know that we're caretakers.
Right.
Sometimes we think that we are good people, but we don't realize that we are absorbing all of their energy, trying to do a good thing. So how do we separate that? And that's